The second story, which again comes from India and actually comes from quite close, comes from Noida. If you don't know, Delhi is a huge megacity, and there's a river that cuts down along the eastern side of it. And that's where the city ends. The city ends at that river, and across that river you have the city of Noida. The only thing that stops Noida being absorbed into the megacity, like every other city around it, is the fact that, again, it's across the river, and that river is also a state marker. It's a UP. I'm trying to remember what UP is. I think I had it written down, didn't I? I had this. No, I didn't have this. Okay. I'm going to have a double look. Upper.
Hang on, sorry. There's a lot of people saying about my point. Oh, there's this intersection of being trans and being homeless, right? And like, yes, and that is one reason to care. But I really want to emphasize we should care just because homelessness is a problem and because no one should be homeless. I understand like wanting to focus on trans issues, but we also need to care about everyone just in general, I think. And if we care about homeless people because regardless of whether or not they're trans, even if they're not trans, then they can care about trans people even if they're not trans, and we can kind of have a massive amount of support we wouldn't usually have.
The state is Uttar Pradesh that actually Noida belongs to, but it's still connected to the metro, to Delhi's metro, which, underground tube, some of it's above ground as well, so it's a mixed rail. What they've done is they've taken one of their old stations and they have renamed it Pride Station in honor of the trans community. They've also hired 6 trans members of staff in the process of this. Now that might not sound like much, these are different ticket conductors, etc. It might not sound like much, but you have to sort of also understand the social context of India, and that's the fact that the perception of trans people is tightly associated with the, tightly associated with the Hijra community. They're not the same, there is a distinction, but the Hijra community is very often seen as sort of the go-to of trans imagery in India. It's what they think of when they hear it. And a lot of the Hijra are beggars. They travel around, they do different services, they offer blessings. There's a sort of special religious sentiment to the Hijra. It's kind of strange. They're kind of revered, but they can also be subject to a lot of hostility. The way that I can probably think about it is that they share a lot of similarities with the Romani in Europe, in how they're kind of seen as like offering the spiritual sort of guidance or role, but at the same time there's like a lot of superstition and rumors about it. For example, Hijra are very often some of the first people targeted in witch hunts because there's a lot of suspicion about Hijra curses and all that. But again, they're very often seen as like not being in employed jobs, in doing blessings, begging, selling things on the street. So for them to get stable jobs in a railway, which is named in their honor, that's kind of a big step for them. It's a sign that there is mobility for them. They can get these jobs, they can be welcome, and they can be respected as well. Like, I've had my issues with the metro because as a trans person, the metro can be quite a scary place. The metro here, going through the metro is like going through TSA airport security. You have to put your bag on an X-ray and you have to go through a metal detector, just like you do at an airport. They're very efficient at it, so it doesn't take as long as it does in an airport. But yes, you have to do that every time you enter the building. You have to do that. They do the same thing with malls over here. And the thing is, they have armed guards stationed at each of the entry points. And the weapons are visible. They sit behind these bomb screens slightly away from where the pat-downs are done. So it's like, it can be very nerve-wracking, especially considering the lines are gendered. and if you pick the wrong queue, they like to challenge you on it quite verbally and vocally, and that can lead to a rather stressful moment where I forget every word that I know in Hindi, and I'm being yelled at by someone, and I'm just like looking over the guy with the gun behind the bomb screen, going, "Is he going to think that I'm doing something?" Offhand, so I'm reaching for something or I've got something in my bag. Um, so yeah, that's sort of there's a lot of tension. The Metro has pledged that like if people identify as this, they're allowed through whichever gender queue they require. Um, there's not been so much implementation of that though. I've not seen. Again, I tend to still avoid the Metro, but seeing an entire station being renamed in the honor of trans people, seeing trans people being hired, hopefully that will act as like a hub, a central point for like more trans inclusive sort of approaches to people being applied, etc., which will then hopefully disperse out throughout the rest of the metro, because I see they like move around workers whenever workers are needed in different places. So yeah, hopefully it's a sign of good things to come. But yeah, it's just really nice. Like, I know the renaming is symbolic, but the actual going out of their way to hire applicants. There's a sad note to the article, which is the fact that as some people became aware of it, they'd already hired all of their spaces that they had open. So some people are like still turning up asking, "Hey, do you have an opening for trans people?" And they're like, "Sadly, we don't anymore." Hopefully they'll like make the call out for future jobs in other stations. That'd be nice. But yeah, it's just moving forward with things in general.